So, a while ago I made a video criticising people's decision to skip games in a franchise as they are from a generation or two before the current one. And I'd like to apologise for some of the harsh statements I made about those people, so I'm sorry. Because I found a much worse line of thinking, and now I don't have any mean things to call them. So, I'm talking about people who refuse to play the original games and would much rather see games remade, as anything that is older than 10 years old is too old. I mean, look at this game, it's too old. This game? Too old. Too old. Now, you see, when I'm at work, I can't really access video game websites, and so have to go to news websites with a video game section, and that's how I found out about this line of thinking. So I imagine this is the most general audience / casual opinions, as I had not seen these thoughts being shared on such a regular basis. How about we go through some of these comments? I'd definitely be up for a Metal Gear Solid remake. It's very much like Final Fantasy VII in that it's a really important game, but it's been kind of hard to get hold of until recently, and is really showing its age in its original form. Other ones I'd love to see that aren't quite on the same level are Soul Reaver, Silent Hill and Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, plus a bunch of Nintendo games from the N64 era. Not only are remakes fun, but they're basically necessary to show why some classics are thought of that way. Silent Hill, for example, is basically unplayable now, but it's a fantastic game I'd love to see revamped. I don't see how wanting to replay a game I've enjoyed with updated graphics and controls, or other additional features, is superficial at all. There are plenty of older titles that are still perfectly playable, such as the NES, SNES era Mario games, because the 2D sprites still look good and the controls are precise. The majority of those early 3D games were very much hindered by the technology though, something which affects gaming more than any other medium, to the point where, especially when compared to modern games, it actually affects my overall enjoyment. There are many PlayStation 1 and 2 games where it's actually difficult to make out everything clearly due to the graphics, and dying because of clunky controls has never exactly been much fun, has it? Plus, those that weren't old enough, or weren't even born when the original was released, aren't going to go out and pick up a PlayStation 1 and play a 20-year-old title. Again, this isn't an issue with movies, so it's a chance for new fans to appreciate a classic they otherwise would never have had the chance to play. Now, you know me, I got nothing better to do at work, so I decided to set the record straight. In my message, I talked about how I consider old games to be masterpieces despite their age, that older games utilise the hardware of the time to make games that would look timeless and appealing the same way sprite-based games do. And that if you only play games for the latest product, and have no interest in games preservation, or playing older games, then you probably aren't in this hobby for the art of it. And you know what happened? The owners of the website shut down my comment, which ended up being the dinner bell, as lots of comments ended up criticising my airtight points. So I feel no remorse for calling these people out on their shitty opinions because they started it. This is from the owners of the website. Silent Hill is many things, but we wouldn't say perfect was one of them. The graphics were terrible even 20 years ago, the controls were never great, and all the sudden logic puzzles at the end were very jarring. Games aren't like movies, and movies aren't like games. I think before I continue it's worth separating a remake to a remaster. A remaster is taking the source code of an older game, or as much of the original as the publisher kept a hold of, and making it playable on modern systems, hopefully with the added benefit of improving resolution, frame rates, and quality of life improvements, so long as they are optional of course. Where a remake is taking a pre-existing game and rebuilding it from the ground up with modern day sensibilities for better or worse. That doesn't mean that one is inherently better than the other, as either can be good or absolutely terrible. In fact, some of my favourite games are themselves remakes of previous titles, such as Remake, which takes the themes and atmosphere of the original game and heightens them using, at the time, more powerful hardware. Remake was even directed by Shinji Mikami, who also directed the original, so the game felt true to the spirit of the original in every way, while still bringing new surprises and mechanics that helped breathe new life into the game but still feel like they always belonged. And many moments of that game were built in such a way that if you played the first game, your expectations would be subverted, making an unfamiliar experience in a familiar setting. But I guess now that Remake is over 10 years old, it's time to remake it the same way we needed that Metal Gear Solid remake, right? Please allow me to vent about the prospect of a Metal Gear Solid remake for a second, will you? For me, the original Metal Gear Solid is a classic and a masterpiece of its generation, helping pioneer the action stealth genre whilst messing with new and interesting tech at the time. Why bother remaking it? And again, even. Every now and then a news article is published saying how some guy is remaking Metal Gear Solid, And instead of doing the smart thing and keeping his mouth shut about it and then releasing it so it stays on the internet forever in some way or another, fella needs to flex and get his ego up, so he shares a couple screenshots and then Konami nukes his project from orbit. And all we're left with are a few screenshots of the game, which lots of people then lament over what could have been. And I'm sitting here thinking, really? You think this looks better than the original? These Unity-ass looking assets with lens flares to boot? Are you joking? Metal Gear Solid looks great. It has a style and atmosphere you'd expect from a game that launches genre. Also, now that Kojima has left Konami, what chance does Remake have in capturing what made the original such a groundbreaking title? It's the same thing with other games that have fan remakes. I remember Ocarina of Time getting a lot of reconditioning by fans by plopping a Link model in some Unreal Engine field with bloom. The most depressing thing about this is people think that this looks better than not only Ocarina of Time, but stuff like Breath of the Wild and Twilight Princess. An accomplishment I have in my life is I've never played a Final Fantasy game, as they are far too mainstream for my taste. Are you kidding me now? Come on. And so, even as an outside observer of this franchise, seeing the news and trailers for the Final Fantasy VII Remake has gotten me a little confused as to why people were ever a fan of this game in the first place. You take a well-known and loved RPG and change everything about it to the point where it's almost unrecognizable. You change the battle system, you change the personalities and designs of characters, you change events that happen in the story, you change the game to be a multi-episodic series that we have no idea how long it will be or when it's going to be complete. But people are over the moon with every trailer that gets released, and I'm sitting here thinking, am I missing something? If this happened to one of my favourite games, I'd be pretty upset. One of my main reasons I have a gripe with game remakes is the fear that they will replace the original. That someone who plays a remake to a game feels they have experienced the game the same way they would if they had played the original, meaning the old game is lost and forgotten. If I were to type in Resident Evil 2 into Google, what do you think comes up? This may be less of an issue given video games' relatively new emergence into the world of media, but there may be a time people forget about the original in favour of the remake. If game preservation itself wasn't such a joke, it'd be less of a problem, with only the most well-known of retro games getting released on newer platforms. For you to buy again, of course, even if you own the original. And with Nintendo okay with removing ROM websites and resetting the Virtual Console every generation, and other companies being really flaky on backwards compatibility, playing older games has become a serious hassle. So I can understand why many people wouldn't want to go through the hassle of tracking down an original copy of a game, the hardware to play it on, and a TV able to play it. I mean, you could just emulate it, but then Big Daddy Nintendo might hurt you and your family. But that doesn't give you the excuse to call older games bad-looking or unplayable. Those old unplayable games are the foundation of everything we play nowadays, so show a little respect, yeah? Maybe I'm being a little bit too overdramatic. Sure, if a little-known PC Engine game never gets an easily obtainable version and gets lost to time, what's the loss there? I mean, nothing like that would happen to a well-known, well-loved, and hugely influential title, right? Fucking GoldenEye. Only ever released on the N64, no other way to play it due to licensing issues. Eventually those carts and those consoles are going to become faulty, and then no one will be able to play it. But don't worry, we have a new and improved version of GoldenEye instead. That's what you wanted, right? I think a good compromise would be that if a remake of a game comes out, the original should also be included alongside it. Some remakes have done this before, so I don't see why this is not a reasonable request. That way, the masses get to play the latest flavour of the month before moving on to the next thing, and people who actually give a shit about video games are able to better preserve the things that built the industry. Resident Evil 3 comes out next month, and I'm pretty worried about it. Resident Evil 3 is one of my favourite games in one of my favourite franchises. A game that is often treated as the black sheep, even though we live in a world where Code Veronica exists. And so I'm not looking forward to whatever changes they make that could potentially ruin the game's legacy. And the comments from people that now say there's finally a good version of RE3, even though this new version removes a lot of key features that helped make that game stand out. But I'll have to see for myself when that game comes out.